Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today for a threat briefing on the public sector industry. In today's conversation, we will be offering actionable intelligence based off the research of our Trustwave SpiderLabs team. My name is Julie Vickery Kirsten. I am the Global Events and Marketing Manager here at Trustwave, and I will be your host. I'd like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. If you are viewing this session live, our webinar platform allows you to customize your viewer screen. Feel free to adjust the size and positioning of the different windows to accommodate your liking. We do recommend that you use Chrome as the browser of choice. If you have any problems with the audio or session delivery, I always recommend that you hit refresh. I promise you will not need to re-log in, and the system should overcome any connectivity issues. Today's webinar will include both a presentation and a question and answer session. You will find the questions window in your webinar screen, and we encourage you to answer questions as you think of them throughout the presentation, and we will address as many as possible at the end. Lastly, today's presentation will be recorded, and we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone with a link to that recording. A copy of the recording will be made available on demand on our website for future reference. Before we dive in, I would like to welcome our security experts who will be presenting today, Grayson Lennox and Carl Siegler. Grayson Lennox is the Director of Consulting for Trustwave Government Solutions. He runs the SpiderLabs team and our client-facing product consultants. Grayson is a Navy veteran and has worked in the public sector for more than 15 years. Carl is a Senior Security Research Manager for Trustwave SpiderLabs. He and his team are responsible for threat intelligence, responsible disclosure, IDS signature development, and editing of the SpiderLabs blog. Carl has worked professionally in information security for more than 25 years. Without further ado, let's get started. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Julie. And good day, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the public sector, and let's go ahead and get started. So in case you are unaware, cyber attacks in the public sector are still making headlines. So we see these in the news pretty much nonstop. There's a couple headlines we just pulled, and there's plenty more that we could have pulled from. So City of Wichita shut down due to a ransomware attack. We see that very commonly across the public sector, hitting public utilities, water systems throughout the U.S. I'm sure people here remember Colonial Pipeline. Australia is getting a lot of attacks. They're targeting critical infrastructure. So there's public institutions across the globe we targeted with attacks. I'm based here in Atlanta, Georgia. And the biggest county in Georgia, Fulton County, was compromised with a ransomware attack just in January from Lockbit. We'll be talking about Lockbit quite a bit. That's still an ongoing issue for the city. We still have problems. I'm not able to actually schedule a replacement for my recycling with the county because of all of the issues. Systems are shut down across the county, and because they didn't pay the ransom, they're still recovering from that damage. So it's still a major issue. I'm sure that anybody who's attending this realizes that. So let's talk about the report itself. There are specific challenges in the public sector when it comes to implementing proper security that affect the public sector in a very unique way. Legacy and diverse systems, the first one I want to talk about. With legacy and diverse systems, we're dealing with a lot of organizations in the public sector that are not able to upgrade for whatever reason. They tend to be very change adverse. Changes come very, very slowly. And we see that across the board. And when you don't have the ability to upgrade, to change, maybe even to patch, security vulnerabilities get introduced here. There's a long-standing story about COBOL programmers. Back in the end of the millennia, back in Y2K, when government organizations were trying to patch their systems against Y2K, they discovered that a lot of these systems were so old that all the code was written in COBOL. It was pretty hard to find COBOL programmers back then. And a lot of people came out of retirement. Programmers came out of retirement to program and fix that code. This occurred again during the pandemic in 2020, with so many people trying to apply for government services, for relief. Their systems were getting overrun, and they had to start hiring COBOL programmers again. So we have this ongoing situation where we see very old legacy systems that are not getting upgraded or updated. And when they are, oftentimes it's just a point patch that is done for that specific system. Those complexity, which can introduce risk. Focus on public service, right? We're in the public sector. We are here to serve the public, whether it's with education, whether it's with government services. And that focus on public service usually are geared towards towards accessibility, towards ease of use, making sure that all of your constituents, all of your citizens, anybody that needs to be serviced by this organization will have access and availability to those services. Because of this, when you are trying to make sure that you have accessible to the public, when you're trying to make sure that it's very easy to follow along, a lot of times that focus on accessibility comes at the detriment of security controls. And we often see a lot of complexity that is introduced because of that, and a lot of gaps and risks that are introduced because of that. Fragmented IT infrastructure, absolutely. A lot of these organizations are very heavily siloed, and we'll see that in the siloed information stores as well. These organizations tend to be very strictly controlled internally, but then they find they need to actually work with other organizations as well. Once you have that, you have individual organizations that are in control of their own security, their own systems, their own processes, their own workflow, and then they're trying to integrate with an entire different department or organization with their own processes, workflows, and systems. You're going to have difficulties, you're going to have problems trying to merge those technologies, and that is going to introduce risk.
That one's a little bit of a double-edged sword for me as well, Carl. The fragmented structure, it's kind of the double-edged sword. And what I mean is you have this fragmented IT infrastructure, and maybe you have one group in a municipality that's really interested in cybersecurity, and they do a great job with their one little piece. But then you also might have another department, call it the fire department or something like that, that has their own infrastructure, and maybe they don't have the resources, and maybe they don't have somebody. So you wind up with that situation. And then on the flip side of the coin, in some areas, you'll find these municipalities where everyone is sharing the same network. And then if one piece gets compromised, then everybody gets compromised. And which one is best, right, is the big question. And it's one of the things that I've seen repeatedly on both sides of that coin over my career as an incident responder. Yeah.
It's a really great point. A lot of these organizations have differing skill sets, different resources. Some are able to implement security a lot better, have a better focus on it just because of the people and the culture in that organization. And when you're starting to chain organizations together, the weakest link in the chain is the weakest link in the chain.
Right.
And we see that even with things like supply chain. We'll talk about supply chain in a little bit with SolarWinds, right? SolarWinds, that single weak link affected dozens, hundreds of organizations. So definitely something to consider. Data trove. Our public sector organizations probably have the most desirable data sets of threat actors, right? We have Social Security information here in the States. We have all kinds of personal information, personal details, tax information, medical information about our people, the people that we serve in the public sector. And that's definitely information that threat actors want. So you have a very juicy target, extremely valuable data that is often being not secured properly due to the complexity of the implementation of it. Siloed information stores, again, this is very similar to fragmented IT infrastructure, but specific to the data stores on the back end, right? The databases, those systems that are containing all of that data that we just talked about. When you have data that is specifically siloed and is starting to be shared between organizations, you end up in a situation where you could end up with data leakage, leakage of data that should be held as confidential and is not. It's something that definitely needs to be looked at before you start to merge data stores. Limited budgetary resources, absolutely an issue. We see this across the board, especially with local government. where the budget's just, you have a very limited budget. People keep on wanting to decrease their taxes every single year, and the budget coming in is less and less every single year. How are you going to allocate those funds, right? It's not just for security, and security often ends up being a de facto department of IT.
Yeah, that's another one that really,
its own department.
Yeah, that's another one that really hits home as well, Carl, is just the sheer differences in the sizes of some of these public sector organizations, right? I mean, you have some of the largest organizations in the world, like the, Department of Veterans Affairs with 300 and some odd thousand employees, all the way on down to, tiny little counties or townships that might have a single water tower or a single wastewater treatment plant. They all are part of the public sector. So there's this huge disparity. And that little township that's just got 2 pumps and a water tower, they're held to the same security standards as the Veterans Administration. And where does that budget come from, right? It's a little crazy when you think about just how disparate the public sector really is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on that point too, I've often used the example of national e-commerce shops. When you're really small, generally you don't have as much complexity, right? You only have those 2 pumps and a water tower, and it could be a lot easier to secure those organizations because there isn't a lot there. However, resources, whether it's money resources, people resources, etc., limit what you can do at that level. When you get to things like the Veterans Administration, where it's so massive, and they do have great people, great skill sets, an organization that size makes it so hard to implement proper security standards. So when we talk about double-edged swords, there we go again, right? The smaller you are, probably the better you are able to implement security, but you don't have the resources to do so. The larger you are, you have those resources, but the problem is just tremendous.
Yeah, and it honestly ties back to the legacy and diverse systems thing as well. I mean, it's all sort of intertwined. That water tower and those couple of pumps. If the budget's is so limited, those are the guys that might still be running on Windows XP or Windows 7, which is full of security holes. And we wind up in this snake eating its own tail, the infinite loop of cybersecurity, right?
Yeah, and when you're putting those sort of manual point patches on systems, they're now completely out of compliance, and you can't really upgrade them properly because it's now its own unique system, and you own it. And you probably own it for the next 100 years. Absolutely. Regulatory, public sector. You're being held to a lot more regulatory controls than a lot of other organizations are. A lot of businesses can go along doing whatever the heck they want with very little repercussions. Public sector is not the same. There's all kinds of specific compliance rules, regulatory controls that need to be put in place and need to be addressed for any changes that are occurring in the organization. And it's an ongoing process as well. So a lot of times this is eating up a lot of your budget just to make sure that you're still in compliance as you're applying patches, as you're installing new systems and things like that. Again, we're just introducing more complexity to the situation, additional fence that we have to jump in order to get to where we want it to be. Public sector tends to work with other organizations. Central governments work with local governments, work with provincial governments. Local governments work with international governments on the other side of the pond. Our organizations are very meshed together, especially in this day and age. And that international focus brings in, again, its own complexities. It makes it very difficult to implement security properly. Even if you talk about international focus when it comes to regulatory compliance. You may have different regulatory controls in, say, the EU or in China than you would, and all that needs to be applied. Good. Any other comments on this one, Grace?
No, not for me. Let's move ahead.
So this is the report itself. We just released it this week. The QR code there will take you right to the site where you can download it. I will add in a little caveat here. Be careful QR codes in this day and age. We're seeing a massive spike in malicious QR codes out there. Promise that this one is not malicious. If you click on it, it goes someplace weird. You let us know. Yeah, we're seeing this quite a bit, especially in phishing campaigns. We'll talk about phishing later. You're trying to embed a malicious URL into the phishing email and get users to click on it. To bypass antivirus, malware controls, spam gateways, those threat actors are putting those malicious URLs in QR codes and saying, hey, scan this QR code with your phone and we'll take you there. Again, down here in Atlanta, we have public transportation, MARTA. And in every single MARTA station, you're going to see a big placard that says, download the MARTA app today. And there's a big QR code right there. Well, someone went around with a little magnetic sticky and replaced the QR code in a bunch of stations with their own QR code that looked, it just blended in with the sign perfectly. These attacks are going on, so definitely beware of QR codes. This report. So this is the report that we're talking about here. Everything that we're talking about is going into in deep detail in this report. And we didn't want to just create a report talking about the current trends. We also wanted to talk about specific mitigations you can take. How do you prevent this? We don't want to just discuss a problem without discussing solutions as well. This is an ongoing series of threat reports that we started about this time last year. So we're doing industry deep dives, hospitality, healthcare, retail, etc. This month's report happens to be public sector. But if you're interested in any of the other reports, please let us know. Good. So let's talk about some emerging prominent trends in the public sector. Man, all those swords, they're double-edged. I just want a single-edged sword. Can we just get one single-edged sword? So emerging technologies are great. They're providing new functionality. We're talking about things like AI and a lot of these other new technologies that are coming out. But AI is the big one here. Get prepared. It's not only coming hot and heavy, it's here. Election workers identify deepfakes. There are already tons of discussion up on the Hill in Congress and the White House really govern AI. There was a Joe Biden robocall that was using deepfake technology to emulate Joe Biden's voice that was telling people not to vote primary on Tuesday. These things affect elections. These things have been ongoing. They actually affect on, and we're talking about AI here specifically. ChatGPT came out about a year and a half ago, and everything blew up. I was doing a webinar or a presentation on AI pretty much every month. And every month I would have to update the slide deck with new information. One of the things I was really concerned about was deepfake technology being used to expand business email compromise. Business email compromise is where a phisher pretends to be the CEO, the CFO, one of the C board members, then convinces a lower level employee to perform some action, with typically a wire transfer or sometimes Amazon gift card buying, you name it. Expanding on that, right? And business email compromise, just as a phishing exercise, is a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise. Expanding on that with deepfake technology, now it's not a phishing email. You actually have a voicemail from your CFO telling you need a wire transfer right now. This is happening. I was really predicting that it would be a year or two before this came out. This is happening today. There was a bank employee in Hong Kong. The CFO of the company called him up. It was the CFO's voice and said, I need a wire transfer right now. The employee was a little bit leery about it. He had been trained. He had gone through security awareness training. And the CFO said, oh, let's pull the whole board up on a conference call. And they pulled up like Zoom. And every single person in that Zoom chat was being deep-faked. Deep-faked faces, deep-faked voices. And in that group chat, they convinced this low-level bank employee to wire $25 million to a remote account that was not recoverable. So this is being done today, and it's something we need to prepare for. Good. From a mitigation perspective, and we'll talk about mitigations a lot more in a little bit. If you're using AI in-house right now, figure out where it is and what data it's being used with. I still do not feel comfortable with AI being rolled out as quickly as it is. Be very, very careful with AI rollouts. And other things here are pretty much standard, implement zero trust, MFA security, et cetera. A lot of our basic best practices. The second to last bullet point there, train public sector staff citizens and citizens on AI threat. This is really important. Used a lot right now in phishing attacks. And that's because these AI models right now are large language models, and they are implementing their understanding of language to write phishing emails. There was an example I provided where you can grab somebody's LinkedIn profile, just copy and paste a LinkedIn profile from LinkedIn to ChatGPT or Llama or whatever you're using, and say, can you compose an email that would convince this person to click on a link? And ChatGPT was more than happy to go ahead and create that email for me. And when you're doing that, you are eliminating a lot of the red flags we look for when it comes to phishing attacks. We train our people to look for clumsy language, poor punctuation, things that might identify English as a second language. And a lot of those red flags are disappearing now with the benefit of AI. For a group where I converted a phishing email from English to Afrikaans. The audience was South African. And I don't speak Afrikaans. They said that it looked fabulous, that it was very fluent. And I'm not sure I could have done that with Google Translate. So it's getting a lot harder out there. Definitely update your security awareness training to include AI. Good. I'm hitting my space bar.
Yeah, Carl, the one thing that jumps out at me there about the story that you told about the deep fake board meeting is, again, going back to robust cybersecurity and robust policies and procedures. Why does one person at that company, at that business, have the authority to solo transfer $25 million? That's just bad procedure, right? There should be a maximum amount that any one employee can send by themselves. And that can be done via policy and procedure tied in with the commercial bank that they use.
Absolutely. I also like the 2-key method. No one single employee should be able to do that. You need at least 2 employees that conclude that it needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There's definitely this is definitely a policy issue, and this is things that we can accomplish with policy. Humans are easily tricked. That's the biggest problem here. But we need to enforce policies and prevent this from happening from that level. It's a lot easier than telling people like, hey, if you see my face on screen, make sure it's really me. That's going to be a lot more difficult to do than having some hoops that people need to jump through before you start. Good. Convergence of IT and OT. Everybody's concerned about critical infrastructure, utility companies being compromised, those windmill farms, water utility plants, electrical grid, etc. This is becoming, I won't say more and more likely. That's a very bad way to say it, but it's becoming more and more prevalent, let's say. Interest in this has become a lot more prevalent. And it's become somewhat easier for threat actors to infiltrate these environments because they're being connected to the standard IT infrastructure. This is for ease of use. It's for availability. If you have a valve that shuts down, rather than having to send a on-call person to the plant physically to change it, you can log into the administrative interface over the web and modify that valve or take a look at what the issues are for logging information, et cetera. But that connectivity can cause a lot of issues. That connectivity can allow actors into that environment. We saw this with Colonial Pipeline. They weren't able to get to the OT back end, but they were able to get to a lot of front end networks that provided, sales, fulfillment, et cetera. So it's becoming more and more of a problem. I will say that a lot of people are under the impression that OT infrastructures can be compromised like any other network. You just toss malware in there, encrypt the systems with ransomware, whatever you're going to do, throw that backdoor in there. It's not quite as easy as a lot of tech journalists will make it sound. A lot of these OT environments are very highly unique. Each one is sort of set up with its own sort of systems, workflow, fault tolerance, et cetera. And there isn't just one system for everything. Nobody's going to hack two systems and shut down the entire electrical grid for the United States, right? That's just not in the cards at all. However, with proper reconnaissance, organizations, threat actors can get into these organizations. We saw this with Stuxnet, right, which was an air gap network. They actually infected a USB stick to push the malware from because generally they're actually connected together. But threat actors need to know exactly how they're connected together and what they're going to be looking at the back end. So reconnaissance goes very slow with this, and is essential for pulling off any real OT attack.
Yeah, this one, this is one of those ones that's near and dear to my heart, because these OT attacks and the combination of IT networks and OT networks ranges from inconvenient to lethal, right? And so it requires a lot of attention. You know, these operational controls can do everything from spot welding cars, you know, and robotic automation and bottling plants for beverages, all the way to managing some of the largest power systems, pipelines, and even dam infrastructure. You know, think about, if you stop for a minute and you think about the kind of damage that an attacker could inflict by opening the floodgates on a dam and you know, overrunning a river valley in the snow melt or spring storms. It's crazy, and it requires some real attention and some real thought in this day and age.
Yeah. And threat actors that are attacking these systems, they're not going to be as noisy as we see with, say, Lockbit targeting a healthcare organization.
Right.
The skill set and the need to understand what's on the back end, these tend to be extremely skilled individuals with goals. And generally those goals aren't monetary. Generally those goals are espionage or, cyber warfare. We're talking about nation state entities that do have these resources.
Right.
So when these officials say that they know that our networks, they know that for a fact. So it's the stakes are very, very, very high.
Yeah, it almost sounds counterintuitive. Almost sounds counterintuitive, Carl, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the type of threat actor that's going to sit there low and slow and avoid detection is far scarier than the one that jumps in, locks everything down, and immediately tries to monetize. I mean, at least we know what their motive is and what their goal is. It's to get paid, right? It's the other kind of attacker that are stealing data, not monetizing it, and just collecting it for other purposes, or sitting low and slow to just gain access to a network like this and wait for whatever it is, a potential attack, a declaration of war. Those are definitely the kinds of things that keep me up at night. Honestly, it's not ransomware.
Yeah, right. And cyber insurance, it's going to protect your bottom line to a certain extent to get hit with ransomware. What are you going to do if the floodgates on a dam are opened up, right? When we're talking about human lives, there really is nothing that to remediate those. Okay. Access and data brokers on the dark web. This is becoming more and more prevalent. Either malicious editors, people that used to work for the organization, temporary contractors, or people that stole credentials, because credentials are very commonly reused and underground forums. It's a very common way to gain initial access, get somebody's credentials, pay somebody for their ID. A lot of disgruntled employees these days, a lot of churn and burn through contractors and temps. All of this can open up specific avenues into your organization. So be very, very careful with your credentials for your organization, and monitor your credentials very, very closely. MFA is absolutely important here. And you see this quite a bit, don't you, Grayson?
I have, yeah. I've seen this initial access broker kind of methodology, and this as the start to a lot of different attacks over the last few years. So many now that I've actually started doing tabletop exercises and attack simulations that are based around this, because a lot of people have very crunchy exteriors, right? And you're not going to be able to perform an external out attack. But if you've got valid credentials, that gives you quite a foothold into most environments, especially if they're not mature enough to have properly implemented multi-factor, like you were just talking about. So, yeah, if you have been out on the dark web and out on some of these forums, like you and I both have, you've seen the banner ads, selling access to some of the largest, largest companies in the world, international companies, and some of these are $10 or $20 for a password list. Some of them are proof of work, and it's $20,000, but that $20,000 is going to get you guaranteed access because someone has breached a perimeter, and now they're trying to sell that to a ransomware as a service crew or something along those lines. So it's scary stuff. You really do have to watch those credentials and watch that authentication very closely.
Absolutely. It's a massive problem. We even see requests for credentials. Anybody have credentials out there for T-Mobile, for SimSwap, things like that? We see that, all those requests, and a lot of these criminal organizations, collectives, want to split their activity out and monetize, and I can sell that and monetize that. Not only have I made money, but also I am limiting my liability for the eventual compromise, because I'm not the one who's actually going to have the skin in the game when it comes to stealing data from that organization. That's where we see a lot of these ransomwares and service organizations, right? They're letting their affiliates do all the dirty work while they sit there back and they just collect their 10%. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of that division of responsibilities as well.
Right. Well, and again, it goes right back to an earlier point. That type of attacker that's looking to just monetize is way less scary than the other types of attackers that are out there, right? I won't say I trust an attacker like that for sure, but somebody that just breaks into a company and then immediately stops without doing any more damage and turns around and sells that access, we know exactly what their motives are.
Yep. Exactly. Good. Okay, so all of our threat reports are split up into a generalized attack chain or attack flow. This is what that looks like. And you'll see this across the board in order to standardize the reports and kind of give apples to apples type comparison across industries. We talked about the attack chain in this format. So initial foothold, how those threat actors are getting that initial foothold into an organization, initial payloads that they use, how they expand and pivot their access after that initial payload is deployed, what malware they're using after they get to their target systems, and then what sort of exfiltration or post-compromise actions are being taken after the malware has been deployed. So we see a bunch of threat actors here, threat tactics, so we'll go through these. So initial foothold, phishing, spam, and scams. I know every single security presentation you have seen for probably the past 15 years has included a slide on phishing. The reason for phishing is still the #1 method that threat actors use to get an initial foothold. If they can find a vulnerability in software that gives them that, great. Those can be, believe it or not, somewhat hard to find, especially for something that is publicly facing. If the software is patched, what probably is not patched is the human behind the keyboard. So those threat actors are going to use social engineering tactics to target that person behind the keyboard and get specific information or get some action performed. We still see it. We're going to continue to see it. It's not going away. They know this is the most useful tool they have in their toolbox. And with AI and AI phishing on board, it becomes even more an issue for organizations. You see the chart there. I think that's 80-20. 80% of, and these are coming directly from telemetry from our customers, from defer, etc. we're seeing that about that initial foothold is gained through phishing. Clicking on a lure, clicking on an attachment. All the percent is exploit hold. The threat actors are going to put their initial payload in. Now, sometimes this is going to be a payload that they're used to working with, something that they have a lot of good experience with. Things like bootloader, very popular. A lot of these other loaders that are primarily made to go under the radar, so they're not detected by anti-malware because they're sort of defanged. They don't do much, but download additional malware. And that additional malware needs to be downloaded in a way that will completely bypass any security controls that you have in place. Antivirus, anti-malware, spam gateways, etc. So with these loader programs are going to download your specific tools in a way that obfuscates it, maybe downloads it in chunks, base 64 encoded, even be encrypted and then decrypted at the destination point, etc. Threat actors just rely on the tools that are available on most systems. The system's probably a Windows system. That Windows system probably has PowerShell, and PowerShell is a godsend. So a lot of these threat actors will just use the tools that are on the system already, the tools that are available for them as soon as they get that access. This will often go under the radar because they're valid tools. They're tools that are expected to be seen on the system as opposed to your trying to download. And a lot of times for this initial foothold, that's all they need. So this is some poor schlup's laptop or something. They want to expand from this system to the actual goals, the databases, the mail system. Good. Yeah, and then we divide that out between command and scripting interpreters, then user execution. User execution is when the end user behind the keyboard clicks on an attachment or a phishing email, etc., opens up the executable and installs it for the threat actor. Good. This is actually also where we'll see, I don't know what I'm talking about here, live off the land, or what we call lull bins, live off the land binaries. And these are valid tools on the system that can be used to download other tools. You'll see these often in patching software. Patching software has a component that needs to download patches from another system. A lot of those pieces of software on a system really don't care what they download. So you can take that existing binary on the Windows system and then use it to download whatever tools you specifically want. We see this quite a bit, and there's entire web pages dedicated to a current list of what we call, again, lull bins, BIN,
right?
Live off the land binaries. Very, very common.
There are a couple of things there that you touched on, Carl, that really hit home for me. One was AI, both on the the initial payload and in the initial foothold and the phishing messages, right? ChatGPT will help you write a properly worded, English language phishing email. It will fix your grammar, it will fix your spelling, and it knocks out some of those early things that we've all been trained to look for. Look for misspellings, look for bad grammar, look for the obvious signs of English as a second language. The GPTs of the world are helping our attackers with that. And the other piece here, before you even get to the lull bins is, if you're savvy with the AI and the GPTs of the world, they'll actually write payloads for you. You can ask it to write you a payload that will specifically bypass a CrowdStrike or a Mandiant FireEye endpoint. And, they're relatively successful. So adversaries it's getting easier for our adversaries, quite honestly. And, the lull bins thing with PowerShell enabled on almost every Windows system on the planet, there's almost nothing you can't do with PowerShell and a book on PowerShell commands. There's a couple of things that I've seen, in my career as an incident responder and running pen test teams. This is what our attackers use, right? This is what the white hats use because it's there. And it's one of those things that's actually pretty easy to key on as an incident responder or as a SOC to look for things like PowerShell. There's a couple of switches that I've seen used in tandem, the -nop, no profile, and and -IEX, where it's executing from a download. Those two together equal bad, right? 99.9% of the time. So yeah, it definitely hits home in the real world.
Which gets back to basic best practices of auditing and monitoring, right? If you're not auditing and usage of these binaries, it's going to go under the wire. You'll never ever see it.
Yeah.
And you don't want to monitor all PowerShell usage because you might use PowerShell validly in the network for a lot of different things. So figuring out how to fine tune your detections and your monitoring, your auditing for specific malicious environments or activities, it's a hard problem. Nobody's saying it's easy. And when we talk about basic best practices, you'll see a lot of mitigations for a lot of security professionals out there. These are the same mitigations, the same pieces of advice that we have been giving out to people since the 90s. Not much has changed here because of basic best practices. And it's not necessarily their fault. We say basic best practices like it's a kid's children's book that you can just walk through really quickly. It's just not that easy. And we acknowledge that it's a very, very difficult problem. Expansion and pivoting. Okay, you're on that little system, that laptop from that temp worker that is just trying to get holiday pay. Now you need to pivot and move to something that is more valuable. You're going to be targeting the web servers, the mail servers, the database servers on the inside. You want the CEO's machine, you want the CFO's machine, etc. Once you're inside the network, once you're inside that crusty hard shell of a perimeter, the inside tends to be pretty soft. We call that crab security. It's a shell on the outside, but nice, soft, delicious meat on the inside. I was also raised on the Chesapeake Bay. So with expansion pivoting, once you're on the inside, a lot of the reconnaissance that you would do from the outside, looking for vulnerable systems, looking for available exploits that or vulnerabilities that have not been patched yet, here from the inside. You have freedom to scan systems, etc. So we'll see that happen. They're going to probably start scanning and doing reconnaissance from that inside foothold. And they're going to be looking for ways to move to those other systems, location of vulnerabilities. A lot of times it's just credential access. Once you're on the inside, you already have a user account. It could be very easy to escalate the privilege of that account or use the credentials of that account to trick other internals into providing access that you may not have had before. Access, a lot of these are brute force attacks. Your password's long and strong. One thing that our threat hunt team sees quite often that really surprised me is so many users that have clear text credentials embedded in scripting files, VBS, PowerShell, etc. A lot of times, because they don't want to enter the password every single time, they'll just embed the username and password, the credentials, right into the script and just let that run. It seems to be the new password on a post-it under the keyboard because our threat hunters are finding these all the time and access the system that script was connecting to. Good. Lateral movements, remote services as well. Yeah, so RDP, VNC, any of your remote desktop services, make sure they're locked down and secure. A lot of threat actors are going to be using the VPNs, the RDP remote services to gain access to systems. And then persistence techniques are just how they stay on the system post-reboot. You found a malicious piece of software on a system, you go ahead and reboot it, and that's going to remove it from running. No, it's going to go ahead and restart itself. And there's all kinds of ways that it can maintain that persistence. A lot of times it is embedding into the registry, things like that. A lot of times they set up their own services, their own accounts to automatically set things up. Sometimes they're event triggered. As soon as I send a couple of ICMP packets to the system, it's automatically going to trigger the software into restarting again. So there's all kinds of ways to maintain persistence there. How about from your side, Grayson? Do you see any specific persistence techniques?
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking the incident responders' love language there with persistence. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those big, top 3 artifacts that we're always looking for, and yeah, I mean, the creation of new services is a big one, which really goes back to, again, registry entries. In the Windows registry and the persistence that you see there, there's, 150 cataloged places that you can set entries and have it either have malware either run at user login or run at boot time. So, yeah, it's very, very common. Fortunately, if you're looking in the right places, they're fairly obvious. But you really do have to look. It's not one of those things where everybody regularly goes and checks their startup folder, unfortunately, or the run key in the Windows registry. But it absolutely can be done, and it can be automated. And quite honestly, our partners at Microsoft are doing a great job with Sentinel, finding things that are unusual entries in those run keys and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really been impressed with how Microsoft is. It feels like it's the Windows NT days all over again. They've really stepped up their game to meet the current challenges.
Yeah.
The one that I just wanted to bring up real quickly, and I know we're kind of going long on time here a little bit, but the scattered spider compromise through Black Hat of MGM last summer. One of the things that they used is a somewhat new technique called bring your own vulnerable device. Whereas these scattered spider collective was working their way through various systems, they dropped a Dell diagnostic driver on the system, just a small little DLL driver that they know is vulnerable. So if they ever needed to get back into that system again, they had a local privilege exploit available to them just by dumping that vulnerable driver on each individual system. And that can often go under the cover because you don't see a service there. You may expect to see that Dell driver there.
Right.
So they're crafty out there. They're crafty.
Yep.
Good. Ransomware, the malware of choice, the malware du jour. Everyone's using ransomware these days, and there's good reason for it. It is very effective at making money for threat actors. Ransomware back in the day was originally just sort of locking your data away from you and then charging you a ransom. If you ever want to see your data again, pay us. Almost all ransomware these days is using a double extortion technique. They're not only encrypting your data so that you can't access it, they're exfiltrating your data so that they have access to it and you don't. So they will actually have your data, they will have access to your data, you won't have access to your data. And even if you think you can back up the data, you still are now worried about that data getting leaked. And we see this with pretty much all of the threat actors. Lockbit is still the number one threat actor out there, even though they've been sort of spread out. The Lockbit servers were taken down by law enforcement collective. Great job. And Lockbit Soup has apparently been identified as well, the head of the Lockbit organization. So we might see Lockbit cool down a little bit. Lockbit, that's exactly what they do. They will exfiltrate the data. They have a website that anybody can hit, and it says, hey, this government organization, we're going to be leaking their data on October 1st. If they don't pay us the money, come back here to download their data. And again, that really puts a lot of pressure on an organization to pay the ransom. And that's what these organizations are trying to do. There's a horrible case when we're doing the healthcare research. There was a medical clinic in Pennsylvania that was hit with a ransomware attack and eventually had to shut down. During the pandemic, a lot of these threat actors left healthcare alone. That's not the case at all anymore. They're heavily focused and targeting healthcare organizations. For that, they stole data and encrypted the data. But then when they threatened to leak the data, the clinic was a medical imaging company. And the server that they compromised was medical imaging for breast cancer patients. All of this information from breast cancer patients with personally identifiable information. I mean, that is capital E evil. And that clinic had shut down completely because of that. Luckily, very few. I know very few cases that were personally affected by that, but yeah, these threat actors are not fooling around. Anything they can do to get that ransom, they're going to do.
Yeah, that one's really unfortunate, Carl. That's a great example of, these are not good people. These are really terrible people. And to that same note, organizations as a whole, whether they're agencies or private, people have to stop paying these ransoms. We have to be better prepared. And the reason I say that is because law enforcement has produced reports. This is publicly available information. The money that's coming in to these ransomware groups, ransomware as a service, is funding all the horrible evil in this world: drugs, prostitution, human trafficking, weapons of war, you name it, it's being funded by the funds from these types of ransomware attacks. And we really do. We have to get better, and we have to stop paying these ransoms, or the problem will not go away. I mean, they're not interested. They don't care. I've seen them attack children's cancer charities. So, there's no end to this. We have to stop paying those ransoms.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big problem with that is, these organizations are so heavily motivated to pay the ransom at this point. Even last summer, Caesars and MGM were compromised. A lot of people don't talk about the Caesars compromise because Caesars was able to recover themselves in about 2 days.
Right.
Caesars was able to recover themselves in about 2 days because they paid the ransom. They won't admit that publicly, but it's almost guaranteed that they paid the ransom, which is why they fell off the headlines. MGM, 2 months later, is still struggling to recover from that because they didn't. Same thing here in Georgia, Fulton County, we did not pay the ransom, and that compromise happened back in February. They're still cleaning up servers in May. So a lot of these organizations that get hit with ransomware and then pay the ransom, you don't even hear about paying the ransom and spend long cycles of recovery or in the headlines every day as if they've done something horribly wrong. And sometimes they have, but victim blaming is not anything we should be doing here, especially if we want people to stop paying ransom.
Right.
Exfiltration post-compromise again. So that exfiltration component from the ransomware, they're going to exfiltrate data and then try to monetize that data. Here's two specific examples from the public sector. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, was compromised and data was provided on the internet for sale, and specifically these dark web forums. And then the Italian National Police, also compromised, and their data is being offered up. A lot of criminal actors would love to get a registry of everybody that's working for the police department in your local county. So again, juicy targets, a lot of complexity, hard to secure. Good. Okay, and then we'll to the final slide. And yeah, we'll grind through this really quickly so we still have some time for Q&A. If you can stay a little bit later, we'd appreciate it, especially if you have questions. We want to get to all the questions we can. Recommendations and mitigations. Number one, focus on the human elements. We talked about social engineering and phishing being the primary method of getting a foothold in an organization. That is absolutely true. And focusing on your humans, your employees, especially employees that may not feel like they have a lot of skin in the game. Temporary employees, seasonal employees, things like that. Contractors, they may not set a strong password because they don't really care. They're going to be gone in 3 months. Make sure your security awareness training is built for your organization and the people you have coming through your organization, and keep it up to date. If you still have phishing identification training that talks about poor grammar and punctuation, you may want to add a little caveat to that, talking about AI. Protect the number one entry point, email. Phishing is the number one social engineering attack targeting your human elements. Protect that. If you can set up a spam gateway or anti-malware solution on the mail server itself, phishing emails from even getting to a lot of inboxes in the first place. And if you have a technological solution for a threat, implement the technological solution. So try to prevent these phishing emails from even getting to inboxes by protecting the email servers directly. Prioritize vulnerability management and patching. Talk about this all the time. Patch your systems. And organizations get beat up all the time for not patching your systems. Yeah. This is especially true in the public sector. Yeah. You see that too?
Yeah, it's just the whole offensive security thing is the way to advance security posture. And, the very first step of offensive security and the very first offering that we have is manage vulnerability scanning, right? Identify the systems that need to be patched. And sometimes you just got to eat a few minutes of downtime, right? And patch a system. It's worth it, especially when you start talking about the millions of dollars in ransomware that goes out there, right? Those $22 million ransoms, that would pay for an awful lot of proactive service.
Yep. And the average cost of recovering from a compromise is anywhere from 22 million, and in organizations that are heavily controlled, like public sector, healthcare, you're up to sometimes 100, 150 million just for recovery. You know, defining ROI in security has always been an issue, right? Because security is about what didn't happen. You prevented things from happening. So saying like we prevented $5 billion in loss last year, it's a very hard thing to put a thumb back in. But it's getting easier, especially when you look at all of these compromises from ransomware. You can actually pull up headlines for your seaboard. Look, this company was on the line for 22 million. This company was on the line for over 300 million. Those are things that you can actually put in hard text and provide to as part of your defense for the budget request that you and if you don't know what you have, you don't know what to protect. So we talked about vulnerability and patching. Know what you have on your networks. Don't trust that Visio network diagram that's 3 years out of date. Inventory your organization, inventory your networks. They're dynamic. We have issues with server sprawl. Somebody sets up a VMware system for testing and then forgets about it and leaves it on. Somebody turns on a server and was playing around with something and then turned it off. But hey, as soon as the switch reboots, it turns the server back on again. You're going to get all kinds of systems you don't expect to see.
Yeah.
So make this an ongoing process of inventorying what you have, and specifically value systems with high access to high value data. Good. Build effective response processes. Down those gaps and those chinks in your armor. The response process. A lot of people, a lot of organizations get caught with their, just out in the wind, out in the cold, because they don't have a response process that's been practiced. Have a response process. Have it practiced. Make sure you recover backups. Make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. Grayson mentioned tabletop exercises earlier. This is a great way to just sit down and brainstorm. Get all of the participants in there, get your web server admins in there, your switch network admins in there, your security admins, and just say, okay, our web server is just compromised. It's just defaced. What do we do now? And just think about that and see whether or not your current processes and policies really help you do that. And then ongoing threat monitoring and hunting. You will see emails all the time coming out from public sector organizations like CISA that provide IOCs indicators of compromise for current campaigns. This would be hashes for malware, IP addresses for command and control systems, etc. These are lingering in your networks. This is a good way to get ahead of the curve and to stop a compromise mid-compromise rather than waiting for them to get a full concrete hold on your network. And dwell time is an evil thing. Good. Anything else on that slide?
No, I don't think so. I think you did a really good job of covering those points. Building effective response processes. Again, something we can help with, and then the threat monitoring and threat hunting. That's you're walking right down that maturity model for cybersecurity with these recommendations and mitigations.
These don't necessarily have to be technological controls, right? We're not necessarily saying you need to go out there and buy a new product. If you're trying to solve a security problem with product, you're probably not solving the security problem. Security is a people issue. If you have good technology, that's great. If you don't have the people to implement it correctly, you're not doing a good job. So before you invest in new security technology, make sure you're investing in your security people first. That they have the training, they have the skill sets to implement security properly. Okay. And this is the big splashy advertisement for all of us here at SpiderLabs. And I'm very proud of this organization. We do a lot of excellent, great work. I love people I work with. You can see some of our stats here, the pen tests we deliver globally, the defer engagements that we do, identifying malicious URLs. I'm very proud of the company, the people I work with, and the technology we develop. But I'm not going to bore you with a big ad. You can go check that out yourself.
Yeah, Carl,
we
I
are
think
right at the hour.
yeah, between the two of us, there's 20 plus years with Trustwave and with SpiderLabs. So I think that certainly says something about the organization.
True enough, yeah. I hit my my 10-year anniversary this past December, so I'm working on my next decade here. So
yeah. Yep. So 10 years for you, and I'm a boomerang. I've been here twice. I liked it so much I came back, and yeah, I'm at 10 years collectively as well. So there you go.
Love it.
So Carl, do you mind sticking around? We do have a couple of questions. We can run long and answer at least one or two here.
Yeah, absolutely. I am available and definitely want to make sure that we get any questions answered.
Julie, do you want to pick a couple of questions there?
Take it away. Yeah, and I just want to thank you guys. That was great. And just a reminder to everybody on the session that you will be receiving a copy of the webinar recording via email by the end of the week, along with a link to download the briefing. And if you're interested in learning more about today's topic, you can submit a request by clicking on the mail icon at the bottom of your screen. All right, let's see. We've got a couple questions. I think let's just stick to two, just for the sake of time. Okay, let's see. The first one: why do you think local governments are the most targeted by ransomware attacks?
Ooh. Okay, so why are local governments targeted the most? I think it goes back to a couple of the points that Carl and I have already addressed. So part of it is just plain and simple budget. They just don't have the budget to update technology and get to things that are more secure by design. That's a big part of it. Number two, again, the disparity. And that's always the thing that I've found in many, many years of working inside the public sector at a lot of different levels is the disparity between not just the people, the technology, the budgets, the mission. It's very, very difficult inside the public sector to lay down one set of regulations and compliance that really work. And it's really, really hard, especially in some of these tiny, tiny little locations, to find somebody local that has any cybersecurity experience at all. I mean, you may very well wind up with one person that is the technician for the cellular service, for the internet, internet service provider. He's the cybersecurity guy, or she's the cybersecurity guy. It's all one person. And if that one person has gaps in their knowledge, that's where we wind up. And it's also, there is something like 3,200 counties in the United States. That's a lot of targets. So it's a target-rich environment. So there's a lot of things that play into that. It's a really good question.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the joke is always that what is a security team of one? A scapegoat.
A scapegoat. Yeah.
Security person of one is just being set up for the fall. You're just there. The organization definitely invest in your people, and I think that work from home and remote workers are helping that skills gap quite a bit.
Yeah.
I see a lot of organizations that are looking for threat analysts and people that can just work remote. So that can really broaden your the skill set that's available to you as a resource if your organization is good.
Yeah.
And Julie, is there another question there?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Let's just do one more really quickly. Yeah, how can government better support the broader population to prevent or avoid cyber attacks?
Interestingly, I think they already are. I just don't think people are using the resources that are already available in a lot of cases. There's already grant programs out there. There's executive orders with funding behind them. We have organizations like CISA that are full of brilliant people that are putting out really, really good advice and resources. There's also the open source community like the OWASP organization that is putting out not just free tools, but guidance on system hardening. The OWASP top 10 for application security has been out there for, help me out here, Carl, 15 years? I mean, a long time. They've been putting out the list. There are a tremendous amount of resources that are already available. I think that they could probably do a better job of being more firm and not just saying you need to comply, but actually starting to put their foot down and actually enforce regulations. And when they can't enforce firmly, there's usually a reason, and that reason is usually going to be budgetary. So do a better job of getting that money out to the municipalities and getting them the assistance that they need.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. CISA is doing a great job. I actually gave a presentation for them about this time last year, and they're always doing local events in major metropolitan areas. Their known exploited vulnerabilities list is just tremendous. Sign up to their mailing lists. There's so many resources that I think people don't even know are out there available to them. And it's a lot better than it used to be. It used to be we're just all on our own IRC forum to maybe get some technical advice from. Now there's all kinds of resources. So I think the government in general is doing a lot better of a job. I do agree with Grayson that we probably need to not just provide advice, but provide specific standards and enforce those standards. I think we're sort of falling behind on the regulatory angle, especially when it comes to AI and some of these security concerns directly. I would like to see a lot more regulation around that, a lot more expectations around that.
Yeah. Great stuff. All right. I think we're out of time. We're, 6.5 minutes over here.
Yeah. So thank you, guys. And any additional questions that come to mind before I close out, feel free to submit them. And we'll be sure to have one of our security experts follow up with you. Before you leave, we would greatly appreciate it if you would take a moment to fill out the post-show survey to rate the session. You can view that below. You will also be prompted to take the survey at the end of the webinar. With that, thank you for joining, everybody. Thank you, presenters. That was amazing as always, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.